Welcome to our channel, the podcast where we dive deep into the fascinating world of language and linguistics. In today's episode, we'll be exploring the evolution of the English language, how slang and idioms shape communication, and the rich diversity of English accents from around the world. We're joined by two very special guests, Dr. Claire Johnson, a historian of language, and Tommy Harris, a sociolinguist and expert in modern slang. Now, let's dive in. Welcome, everyone, to the Language Lab. I'm Alice, and as always, I'm here with my co-host, Ben. How's it going, Ben?
Hey Alice, doing great? And we're thrilled to be joined by two amazing guests today. We have Dr. Claire Johnson, a specialist in the historical development of English, and Tommy Harris, a sociolinguist who knows all about the role of slang and accents in shaping modern communication. Welcome, Claire and Tommy.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Same here, thanks for the invite.
It's such a pleasure to have you both. So today, we're going to take a fascinating journey through the English language. First up, Claire, we'd love to hear your thoughts on the evolution of English. How did this language we speak today come to be?
Oh, that's a big question, Alice. Laughs English has such a rich history, and it's not a language that evolved in a straight line. As you know, it started as Old English around the 5th century, when Germanic tribes like the Angles and Saxons migrated to what is now the UK. But it wasn't just a matter of one group imposing their language on another. It was a complex mix of influences.
Right, and I guess the Norman Conquest in the 11th century was a major turning point.
Absolutely. With the Normans came a massive influx of French vocabulary, which shifted the entire structure of English. You can see this in words related to law, governance, and culture. A court, a parliament, a judge. All of these come from Old French, but the basic structure of English remained Germanic. This blend of languages is why English has so many words from different linguistic roots.
It's amazing to think about how those historical moments shaped the language we use today. But it wasn't just the French influence, right? There's also the Great Vowel Shift that happened in the 15th century.
Exactly. The Great Vowel Shift changed how vowels were pronounced, and it's one of the key reasons why English spelling and pronunciation don't always match up. Words like a bite here and a meat used to be pronounced differently. This shift gave rise to the English pronunciation system we're familiar with today. And from there, of course, the language continued to evolve.
Wow, that's fascinating. Now, Tommy, let's switch gears a bit. As a sociolinguist, you've studied slang in depth. How do you think slang contributes to the evolution of English?
Slang is incredibly important because it reflects how people are using language in their everyday lives. Slang often starts in smaller communities, think of youth culture, subcultures, or even online communities, and then it spreads, sometimes in unpredictable ways. A term like lit, for example, went from being used in hip-hop culture to becoming a mainstream term for something exciting or awesome.
Yeah, it's wild how quickly slang can evolve, especially now with social media. Some words can go viral in no time.
That's exactly it. Slang spreads so fast today, and it can lose its original meaning or take on new connotations. For instance, woke was originally used to describe being socially aware, but it's now sometimes used sarcastically, or even as a way to mock someone for being too politically correct.
Interesting how the meanings shift, and Claire, with all these changes, idioms also play a huge role in how we understand language. English is full of strange expressions like kick the bucket or spill the beans. Where do these come from?
Idioms are fascinating because they often have historical origins that aren't immediately obvious. Take kick the bucket, for example. It's believed to come from a practice where people, when they were hanged, would stand on a bucket, which would then be kicked away, causing the person to hang. Over time, the phrase became synonymous with death, but its origins were much more literal.
Wow, I had no idea. And I suppose the phrase spill the beans comes from something similar?
Exactly. One theory is that in ancient Greece, beans were used in voting. If someone has spilled the beans, it meant they'd reveal the results of a secret vote.
It's crazy how these idioms stick around, even when the original meanings fade from our consciousness. But that's the beauty of language, isn't it? It constantly evolves, and we adapt to it.
Well, speaking of adaptation, let's talk about accents. Tommy, you're the expert here. What can accents tell us about a person, their background, or even their identity?
Accents are such a powerful part of communication. They often tell us where someone is from geographically, but also a lot about their social identity. For example, a New York accent can signal that someone grew up in a fast-paced, urban environment, while a Southern accent might bring up associations with warmth, hospitality, or even rural life. Accents can also carry cultural baggage. Sometimes people make judgments based on how a person speaks, which can have positive or negative effects.
That's so true. I think about how accents can even influence how we perceive someone's intelligence or status, even though, of course, that's all based on stereotypes.
Right, and it's a shame that we have those biases, but I think things are slowly changing. There's more appreciation today for the diversity of accents and dialects within English, especially as we see more global influences in the media. You no longer need to have a neutral accent to succeed. A person from the Bronx or a person from Texas can be just as successful as someone with a standard accent, as long as they communicate well.
Absolutely. The world is embracing linguistic diversity more than ever, and that's a good thing. So, to wrap up today's discussion, Claire and Tommy, let's leave our listeners with a few tips on how to improve their English. Claire, what's one piece of advice you would give to language learners?
I'd say immerse yourself. Whether it's reading books, watching movies, or listening to podcasts in English, the more you expose yourself to different forms of the language, the faster you learn. And try to pay attention to the history behind the language, because understanding its evolution can really deepen your connection with it.
I agree. And my advice is to embrace slang and informal language. It's a great way to sound more natural when speaking with native speakers. Try to understand the context in which slang is used. It's a reflection of the culture, and once you get the hang of it, you'll sound like a local.
Such great advice, and I would add, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Every time you speak, you're improving, and language is all about trial and error.
Well said, Ben. A huge thank you to our guests, Claire and Tommy, for sharing their insights today. It's been such a pleasure having you on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
This was fun, thanks for inviting me.
And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Language Lab. Remember, language is always changing, so stay curious and keep learning.
We'll see you next time with more discussions on the beauty of language. Until then, take care.